Hello, my name is Derek Allen. This is my POP3S and SMTPS presentation. What is POP3S? Well, let's start with POP3, which is Post Office Protocol 3. It is an application layer protocol used by email clients to retrieve email from a mail server. This protocol supports list, retrieve, and delete operations for messages. POP3 operates by connecting clients, retrieving all messages, and storing them on the user's local system, and finally deleting them from the server. POP3S is just a secure version of POP3. It is an extension of the standard POP3 protocol that adds a layer of security using SSL and TLS encryptions. How do you configure POP3S using Dovecot? First, ensure that Dovecot is installed on your Debian-based system using the command sudo apt-get install devcot core, devcot pop3d, and devcot imapd. Next, to enable secure connections, you want to ensure you have SSL and TLS certifications, which are usually stored in the /etc/SSL/certs, and private keys are located in /etc/SSL/private. Next, you want to configure the devcot for POP3S. The configuration file needed for this is located at /etc/devcot/devcot configuration. Next, in the configuration file from the previous slide, you must enable SSL and TSL using this command sudo nano /etc/devcot/conf.d/10.ssl.configuration and ensure the following settings are configured. I'm not going to read them all out, but you can pause the video if you would like to read them. After putting in the previous commands in the configuration file, you must then restart the Dovecot service using this command sudo systemctl restart Dovecot. And to verify the configuration, use the command open SSL s_client-connect, whatever your domain is, and then 995 for the port, and ensure you see successful SSL and TLS connections. It's important to note if you're using a firewall, make sure to allow traffic on the 995 port. My first hardening recommendation for POP3S is to use strong encryption and ciphers. This ensures that your POP3S server is configured to use strong encryption protocols and cipher suites. Weak or outdated encryption can make your server vulnerable to attack. You achieve this through the use of additional Dovecot configurations. In the 10-ssl.configuration file, you can put in the following commands to achieve this result. My next recommendation is to implement strict certification validation. Properly manage and validate SSL and TLS certificates to ensure that connections are made with legitimate and trusted entities. Misconfigured or expired certificates can expose your communications to man-in-the-middle attacks. This can be achieved by keeping three things in mind. First is certificate validity. Ensure that your certificates are up to date and have not expired. Next is certificate chain. Use a full certificate chain, including intermediate certificates, to avoid issues with certificate validation. And finally, certificate authority. Obtain certificates from a trusted CA. Avoid using self-signed certificates unless absolutely necessary, and even then, make sure they are properly managed and trusted by all clients. My final recommendation is to enforce authentication and access controls. Ensure that authentication mechanisms are robust and that unauthorized access is prevented. Secure login processes help protect against unauthorized access to email accounts. Again, this can be done three ways, either through strong passwords, which enforce strong password policies for email accounts to prevent brute force attacks, multi-factor authentication. If possible, use multi-factor authentication to add an additional layer of security, and access controls. Restrict access to the POP3S service to only trusted IP addresses if applicable, and monitor login attempts to detect and respond to suspicious activity. Next up is SMTPS, which is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol Secure. It is a method for securing the SMTP protocol by wrapping it in an SSL or TLS layer. Unlike a traditional SMTP, which transmits data, including login credentials, in plain text, SMTPS ensures the communication between email client and server is encrypted. How do you configure SMTPS using IIS on Windows? First, open the Server Manager and select the Add Roles and Features option. In this section, check the SMTP Server option. Next, open the IIS 6.0 Manager to configure the SMPT server. In the Manager, expand the server node and go to Properties for SMTP Virtual Server. Next, configure SSL/TLS for SMPTS. Do this by opening IIS Manager and creating a self-signed certificate. Then bind it to the SMPTS server by going to the Server Properties and the Access tab. Find the Certificate tab and follow the Web Server Certificate Wizard instructions to bind your SSL certificate. Continuing on from the last slide, under the Access tab, click Authentication and select Require TLS Encryption to ensure all SMTP communications are encrypted. Next, add SMTPS support on port 465 to secure communications. Finally, if you have a firewall configure it to allow communications on port 465. My first hardening recommendation for this is to enforce strong TLS encryption. Ensure that only strong encryption protocols and cipher suites are used to prevent vulnerabilities in SSL and TLS implementations. This is done through removing support for weak ciphers, such as RC4 and 3DES, or ciphers with small key lengths. You can manage cipher suites through the system registry or using IIS crypto to secure only modern secure ciphers. This is important because enforcing strong encryption protects sensitive email communication and login credentials from being intercepted or compromised during transmission. My next recommendation is to enforce authentication and access controls, meaning only authorized users should be able to send emails through the SMTP server, reducing the risk of abuse and malicious use. This is done through enabling basic authentication with TLS. Make sure that basic authentication is only allowed over TLS encrypted connections to prevent credentials from being transmitted in plain text. Proper authentication and relay restrictions help prevent unauthorized access and misuse of your SMTP server, mitigating risks like spamming and mail spoofing. My final recommendation is to implement IP-based access controls, meaning restrict SMTP access to your server by allowing only specific IP addresses or ranges, reducing the risk of unauthorized access or abuse from untrusted networks. This is done through allowing specific IP addresses and subnets. Configure your SMTP server to accept connections only from trusted IP addresses or subnets, such as internal network ranges or specific partners. Block all other traffic by default. Restricting SMTP access by IP addresses ensures that only trusted networks and users can connect to and use the server, which minimizes the risk of misuse, spamming, or malicious activity from unauthorized sources. How do you configure SMTPS using postfix on Linux? Well, first you must install postfix. Then you must generate or obtain a certificate from a certified authority. Next, you must configure the postfix to use SMTPS on port 465. The steps for this are configuring the certificates and key for TLS, enabling SMTPS and postfix, and enabling SASL or simple authentication and security layer authentication. Next, configure Dovcat for SASL authentication if you're using Dovcat, and then restart all services, and if you're using a firewall, allow port 465. My first hardening recommendation for this is to enforce strong TLS encryption and disable weak protocols. Use only secure versions of TLS and strong encryption ciphers to protect data in transit. Weak encryption protocols and ciphers can expose your communications to various types of attacks. You do this through disabling SSL v2 and v3 and weak versions of TLS like TLS 1.0 and 1.1. You should use TLS 1.2 or higher to ensure secure encryption. This is important because enforcing strong encryption prevents attackers from exploiting vulnerabilities and outdated or weak protocols and ciphers, ensuring that email communications are securely encrypted. My next recommendation is to require authentication for relaying and restrict relay access, meaning prevent unauthorized users from using your server as an open relay, which can be exploited by spammers and attackers to send malicious emails. You must ensure that users must authenticate with valid credentials to send emails. This can be done by configuring SASL with postfix. You should restrict the ability to relay emails to only authenticated users in trusted IP ranges. Preventing unauthorized relay access secures your server from abuse by spammers or malicious actors trying to send emails through your system without permission. My final recommendation is to implement IP-based access restrictions. meaning configuring postfix to allow only specific IP addresses or networks to connect to your SMTP server for sending emails. This is done through complement postfixed IP-based restrictions with firewall rules to block unwanted connections at the network level. For example, using UFW or IP tables to allow access only from trusted IPs. By restricting access to trusted IP addresses, you reduce the chance of unauthorized access or abuse of your SMTP server, helping secure your mail system from external threats. Here are some of my sources. I hope this was educational and have a good day.